The Chicago skyline glittered like a crown of diamonds against the twilight sky. Richard Winters surveyed it all from his penthouse window, a glass of bourbon catching the last rays of sunlight. At 52, he possessed everything a man could want: the corner office at Winter Solutions, the Maserati in the garage below, and enough zeros in his bank account to silence any doubt. Yet an emptiness gnawed at him, as vast as Lake Michigan outside his window. His reflection stared back. Silver-gray hair, precisely cut, tailored suit without a wrinkle, and eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber, that betrayed nothing of the void inside. The elevator doors whispered open behind him, announcing his wife Charlotte's arrival from her charity luncheon. The scent of expensive perfume drifted across the marble expanse. "The Harrington fundraiser was a bore," she declared, dropping her clutch on the glass coffee table. "Though I secured another 50,000 for the children's hospital wing." Richard barely nodded. 15 years of marriage had settled into routine. His success, her social calendar, their perfectly composed life framed like the modern art. On their walls, no children. They had tried, then stopped trying, then stopped discussing it altogether. His phone vibrated. A text from his assistant. Meeting rescheduled. The merger could wait until tomorrow. "I need some air," he announced, setting down his glass. Charlotte looked up, surprised by the break in routine. "The Baldwins are expecting us at 8. Tell them I'm unwell." Outside, Chicago pulsed with evening life. Richard walked aimlessly, loosening his tie, feeling the weight of his watch, a $30,000 timepiece that couldn't buy him a single extra minute of happiness. He found himself in a neighborhood he rarely visited, where neon signs, replaced crystal chandeliers, and the scent of street food overpowered designer cologne. A small diner caught his eye. Marie's Home Cooking. Nothing special, just a weathered sign and warm yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk. Something pulled him toward it, perhaps hunger, perhaps curiosity, perhaps fate. The bell chimed as he entered. The place was nearly empty, just a couple in a corner booth and an elderly man reading a newspaper. Richard slid into a booth by the window, feeling oddly out of place in his three-piece suit. "Coffee?" A waitress appeared, coffee pot in hand, notepad tucked in her apron. "Please." He glanced up and met her eyes. Time stopped. He knew her. Not her name, not her story, but her face. Those high cheekbones, that gentle slope of her nose. Memories flooded back. 20 years ago, a summer internship program his company ran for underprivileged youth. She had been there, quiet and determined, with a shy smile that had caught his attention. "Sarah?" he ventured. The coffee pot froze mid-air. "No one's called me that in years." Her voice was soft with surprise. "Most people here know me as Marie." "Richard Winters." He extended his hand. "You interned at Winter Solutions." "Summer of 2005. Recognition dawned on her face, followed quickly by something else. Apprehension. "Mr. Winters, I wouldn't have expected to see you here." As they spoke, the door to the kitchen swung open. A boy of about 7 emerged, carrying silverware wrapped in napkins. He moved with purpose, setting a place at an empty table. Something about his movements, the careful precision, the serious expression, struck Richard as oddly familiar. Then the boy turned, and Richard's world tilted on its axis. The child had his eyes, not similar, not reminiscent. The same eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber. The boy caught Richard staring and stared back, unabashed, before returning to his task. "Your son?" Richard's voice was barely a whisper, Sarah's face drained of color. "Jacob, honey, homework time," she called out. The boy nodded and disappeared into the back. "He's—" Richard began. "My son," Sarah cut him off. "Just my son." But Richard couldn't breathe. couldn't think, because in that small face he had seen his own reflection. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content for you. Continuing. The merger documents blurred before Richard's eyes. 3 days had passed since his visit to Marie's diner, but he couldn't focus on anything else. The boardroom hummed with conversation around him, executives discussing projections and timelines. But all he heard was the echo of a question he'd been afraid to ask aloud. Could that boy be mine? Richard? His CFO was staring at him expectantly. Your thoughts on the Henderson proposal? Let's table it, he replied, gathering his papers. I need everyone's detailed analysis by Friday. The room emptied. Only his assistant, Diane, remained, concern etched on her face. You've cancelled 3 meetings this week. The board is noticing. Richard sighed, loosening his tie. Find me everything you can on Sarah Mitchell. She interned here in 2005. Now goes by Marie, owns a diner in Pilsen. Diane's professional demeanor didn't waver, though her eyes registered surprise. Personal or business? Personal. And Diane, absolute discretion. That night, Charlotte hosted a dinner party at their penthouse. Richard moved through it like a ghost, smiling mechanically, refilling glasses, while his mind replayed that moment in the diner on endless loop. The boy's eyes, his eyes. Richard is expanding into restaurant chains, Charlotte announced to their guests, linking her arm through his. Aren't you, darling? He's been researching little establishments all week. The lie slid easily from her lips, covering for his distraction. Their marriage operated like this, appearances maintained, questions unasked, emotions carefully regulated. Later, as they prepared for bed, Charlotte studied him in the bathroom mirror. Whatever's bothering you, deal with it, she said, applying her night cream. The Nortons mentioned you seemed off. We can't afford rumors, not with the merger, so close. Richard looked at his wife, beautiful, poised, and as familiar to him as a stranger. When did we become this? He asked quietly. Become what? She replied, but her eyes avoided his. People who care more about what the Nortons think than what's happening between us. Charlotte's movement stiffened. Don't be dramatic. We have exactly what we both wanted. But as Richard lay awake that night, he wondered if that was true. Had he wanted this hollowness, this life where success felt like failure in disguise? His phone pinged. An email from Diane. Information requested. See attached. Sarah Mitchell, now Sarah Miller. Single mother. No father listed on the birth certificate. Jacob Miller, age 7. Born December 15th, 2017. Richard calculated quickly. Summer of 2005. The company retreat. He remembered now. Sarah had been part of the catering staff that weekend, not just an intern. They had talked beneath the stars on the beach, shared a bottle of wine, and then Jacob would be the right age. The timing fit. The next morning he returned to the diner. It was busier, the breakfast crowd filling most tables. Sarah spotted him immediately, her face tightening. We need to talk, he said quietly. I'm working, she replied, pouring coffee for an elderly couple. After then, please. Something in his voice must have reached her. 3 o'clock. There's a park across the street. Richard spent the intervening hours walking the neighborhood, noting how different it was from his usual haunts. Children played on stoops, neighbors called greetings, street vendors sold everything from tamales to hand-knit scarves. Life happened here, messy and vibrant, while he had been living in a sanitized bubble of privilege. At 3, he found Sarah sitting on a bench watching Jacob on the playground. The boy was racing up and down, lost in some private game of imagination. He has your energy, she said as Richard sat beside her. Always moving, always thinking. The words confirmed what he already knew. Why didn't you tell me? Sarah's laugh was hollow. The summer intern tells the company heir she's pregnant. I saw how those stories end. The girl gets a check and a confidentiality agreement. I would never, wouldn't you? Her eyes challenged him. We spent one weekend together, Richard. You didn't even call after. The truth stung. I was engaged to Charlotte. Exactly. And I was nobody. Richard watched Jacob climb to the top of the slide, arms raised in triumph. I have a right to know my son. You have biology, Sarah corrected. I've raised him alone for 7 years. I've been there for every fever, every nightmare, every first. What gives you the right to walk in now? The question hit him like a physical blow. What right did he have? Where had he been when this child, his child, took his first steps or spoke his first word? Jacob spotted them and waved. Richard waved back automatically, feeling a surge of emotion he couldn't name. Does he ask about his father? Richard couldn't stop the question. Sarah's face softened slightly. Sometimes. I tell him his daddy couldn't be with us, but that he would have loved him very much. The past tense cut deep. I want to be part of his life, Sarah. And upend everything? Jacob's happy. We have a good life. I saw your diner's financials, Richard admitted. You're barely staying afloat. Sarah's posture stiffened. So now you're investigating me? What will it take for Richard to earn Sarah's trust? And how? Will Jacob react when he learns the truth about his father? The answers may change 3 lives forever. The confrontation in the park left Richard shaken. He returned to his penthouse, mind spinning with possibilities and regrets. The evidence was clear. Jacob was his son. A child he had never known existed, growing up just miles from his sterile tower of success. The unfairness of it crushed him. Charlotte was hosting a charity committee when he arrived. Society women with perfect blowouts and designer handbags clustered around his dining table, planning a gala. She shot him a warning look as he passed. Don't disturb, don't engage, maintain the facade. In his study, Richard poured himself a drink, then abandoned it untouched. Alcohol wouldn't solve this. Instead, he pulled out his phone and did something he hadn't done in years. Called his older brother, Michael. This is unexpected, Michael answered, surprise evident in his voice. The brothers had drifted apart as Richard's ambition consumed him. I need advice, Richard admitted. It's complicated. They met at Michael's modest brownstone in Lincoln Park, where children's toys cluttered the hallway and family photos lined the walls. Michael, a high school principal with 3 kids and a mortgage, had chosen a different path than his younger brother. You have a son? Michael repeated after Richard explained. And you just found out? Richard nodded, the reality still surreal. Sarah never told me, and now I don't know what to do. What do you want to do? The question was simple but profound. What did he want? For years, Richard had pursued what he thought he should want: success, status, wealth. But now, faced with this revelation, everything shifted. I want to know him, Richard admitted. I want to be his father. And Charlotte? Richard hesitated. Our marriage has been on autopilot for years. This will either end it or force us to confront what's broken. Michael studied him. Little brother, you've spent your life building an empire. Are you ready to risk it all for a child you just met? The answer came without hesitation. Yes. The next day, Richard returned to the diner with a proposal. He found Sarah in the kitchen, prepping for dinner service. 10 minutes, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. That's all I can spare. I want to establish a trust for Jacob, Richard began. For education, healthcare, whatever he needs. Sarah's expression hardened. We don't need your money. This isn't about buying my way in, Richard insisted. It's about responsibility, about ensuring he has opportunities. Like the opportunity to know his father has been there all along. Sarah challenged. "Money isn't what he needs from you, Richard." Before he could respond, the kitchen door swung open. Jacob stood there, curiosity bright in Richard's eyes. "Mom, Mrs. Garcia wants more coffee," he announced, then tilted his head at Richard. "Hi again." Richard's heart jumped. "Hello, Jacob." "Are you Mum's friend?" Richard glanced at Sarah, unsure how to answer. She gave a slight nod. "I hope to be," Richard replied carefully. "I knew your mom a long time ago." Jacob considered this. "Do you like baseball? Mom and I are going to a Cubs game Saturday." "She saved up?" Sarah looked mortified. "Jacob, Mr. Winters is very busy." "I love baseball," Richard interrupted, "and I'd be honored to join you, if that's okay with your mom." Later, walking back to his car, Richard felt lighter than he had in years. A baseball game, a simple pleasure he had forgotten, existed in his world of shareholder meetings and acquisition deals. His phone rang. Charlotte. "The Andersons' anniversary party is Saturday. I RSVP'd weeks ago." Richard watched a father and daughter walk past, her small hand in his. "I can't make it." "Can't or won't?" Charlotte's voice was sharp. "What's going on with you?" "We need to talk," Richard said, "tonight." The conversation that followed was long overdue. In their immaculate living room, with the city lights twinkling below, Richard told Charlotte everything. The intern from years ago, the child he never knew he had, the emptiness he could no longer ignore. Charlotte listened, her face a mask of control. When he finished, she stood and walked to the window, arms crossed. "So that's it?" she asked. 20 years together, and you're throwing it away for some mistake from the past?" "Jacob isn't a mistake," Richard said firmly, "and our marriage has been over for years. We just didn't have the courage to admit it." Charlotte turned, eyes glittering with unshed tears. "I gave up having children for you, for this life we built." The accusation hit its mark. It was true. Charlotte had wanted children early in their marriage, but Richard had always pushed it off, focused on building his empire. Eventually, she had stopped asking. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "We've both made sacrifices, but I can't ignore this. He's my son." "If you've ever had to choose between what you thought you wanted and what your heart knows you need, you know the struggle Richard faces. Have you or someone you know experienced a moment that completely transformed your priorities? Share your thoughts in the comments. The Saturday sky threatened rain, but Richard arrived at Wrigley Field with an umbrella and 3 ponchos tucked under his arm. He spotted Sarah and Jacob near the entrance, the boy bouncing with excitement in his Cubs cap. "You came!" Jacob exclaimed, eyes widening at the official Cubs merchandise Richard carried. "I promised, didn't I?" Richard replied, heart swelling at the boy's enthusiasm. Sarah's expression was guarded, but softened slightly at her son's joy. They found their seats, not the premium box seats Richard could have easily arranged, but standard tickets in the upper deck. He understood Sarah's pride wouldn't allow for more. As the game progressed, Richard observed his son, Jacob's intense focus on each play, his encyclopedic knowledge of player statistics, the way his nose scrunched when he concentrated, just like Richard's own. "Harper's batting average dropped since last season," Jacob explained seriously, "but his RBI numbers are still strong." "You know your baseball," Richard commented, impressed. "Mom and I watch every game on TV," Jacob replied. "This is only my second time seeing them live, though." A pang of regret shot through Richard. How many games could they have attended together? How many moments had he missed? When rain finally broke through the clouds, Richard pulled out the ponchos. Jacob laughed as they struggled to unfold the plastic sheets, and even Sarah joined. In her defenses momentarily lowered. "Prepared for everything, aren't you?" she remarked. "Trying to be," Richard answered, their eyes meeting over Jacob's head. Something shifted between them, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. After the game, they ducked into a pizza place to escape the downpour. Jacob devoured his slice while chattering about the game's highlights. A family, Richard thought with unexpected clarity. This is what being part of a family feels like. Mom said you own a big company, Jacob said suddenly. What do you make? The directness of children. We make technology that helps other businesses, Richard explained. Not very exciting, I'm afraid. My science teacher says technology is changing the world, Jacob replied thoughtfully. That sounds important. Richard's chest tightened. This child, his child, saw value beyond money and power, beyond the metrics Richard had used to measure his life for so long. When it was time to say goodbye, Jacob surprised him with a quick hug. Thanks for coming, Mr. Winters. Richard, he corrected gently. You can call me Richard. Later that night, alone in his penthouse, Charlotte had moved to their lake house to think. Richard made a decision. He pulled out his laptop and began drafting an email to his board of directors. The following week brought chaos. News of Richard Winters stepping down as CEO of Winter Solutions sent shockwaves through Chicago's business community. Speculation ran wild. Health crisis, scandal, hostile takeover. Richard ignored it all, focused instead on the legal documents spread across his desk. His lawyer, Thomas, looked concerned. A paternity acknowledgement is straightforward, but shared custody? Richard, you're asking for a battle. I'm not asking for custody, Richard clarified. Just legal recognition, the right to be in his life, contribute to decisions about his future. And if she fights it, Richard's jaw tightened, then I'll have to prove I deserve that right. He hadn't told Sarah yet. After the baseball game, they had reached a fragile truce. Richard visited the diner regularly, sometimes helping Jacob with homework while Sarah worked. The boy didn't know the truth yet, but his natural curiosity about Richard grew with each visit. Why do your eyes look like mine? Jacob had asked one afternoon, peering into Richard's face with innocent directness. The question had left Richard, stammering, looking to Sarah for guidance. She had intervened with a vague answer about many people having similar features, but the moment haunted Richard. How long could they continue this charade? The answer came sooner than expected. Charlotte returned from the lake house with determination in her stride. She found Richard at his temporary office downtown. I won't be pushed aside, she announced without preamble. That woman can have her child support, but I won't let her destroy what we've built. Richard's stomach dropped. What have you done? Nothing yet, but Winter Solutions is as much mine as yours. The board respects me. If this becomes public, a love child, a secret family, how do you think our investors will react? It was a threat, plain and simple. Charlotte had always been strategic, always 3 moves ahead. Our marriage is over, Charlotte, Richard said quietly. No threats will change that. Her laugh was brittle. We'll see. Richard drove. Straight to the diner, heart pounding, but he was too late. When he arrived, Sarah was standing outside, face pale, a newspaper clutched in her hand. The headline screamed, Winter Solutions heir apparent, tech mogul's secret child revealed. You promised discretion. Sarah's voice shook with fury and fear. Now we're tabloid fodder. It wasn't me, Richard insisted. Charlotte, I don't care who it was. Look. She thrust the paper at him. Somehow they had obtained a photo of Jacob at the Cubs game, circled in red with an arrow pointing to his eyes. Undeniable resemblance to Billionaire, the caption read. Where's Jacob? Richard asked urgently. At school, where tomorrow everyone will know. Do you have any idea what this will do to him? Richard felt the ground crumbling beneath him. In his determination to claim his son, had he exposed him to precisely the chaos he wanted to protect him from? What will happen when Jacob learns the truth about Richard? And can Sarah forgive him for turning their world upside down? The stakes have never been higher, Rain pelted against the windows of Sarah's small apartment above the diner. The space was modest but warm. Colorful artwork, clearly Jacob's, adorned the walls, books spilled from overstuffed shelves, and photographs documented a childhood full of love, despite limited means. Richard sat uncomfortably on a worn sofa, while Sarah paced, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, Principal Evans, I understand. No, he doesn't know yet. Yes, I'd appreciate that. Thank you." She hung up, shoulders sagging. "The school will try to shield him tomorrow, but kids have phones. Parents talk." "I'll fix this," Richard promised. Sarah's laugh was sharp. "How? Will you buy every newspaper? Scrub the internet? Some things can't be fixed with money, Richard." The truth of her words stung. For decades, his wealth had been his solution to every problem. But this human mess of emotions and consequences, couldn't be solved with a checkbook. "We need to tell him," Richard said quietly. "Before someone else does." Sarah sank into a chair, the fight draining from her. "I know, I wanted to protect him." "From me? From feeling abandoned? From wondering why his father never wanted him?" Richard leaned forward, voice rough with emotion. "But I would have wanted him, Sarah. If I had known—" "Would you?" she challenged. "The ambitious Richard Winters I knew was climbing the corporate ladder, engaged to an heiress. Would you really have chosen a child with the summer intern?" The question hung between them, impossible to answer with certainty. The truth was, Richard then and Richard now were different men. The apartment door opened. Jacob stood there, rain-soaked and serious, his backpack clutched to his chest. "Mrs. Peterson dropped me off," he explained, eyes moving between the adults. "She saw the newspaper." Sarah's face crumpled. "Oh, baby." "Is it true?" Jacob asked, looking directly at Richard. "Are you my dad?" The moment stretched, taut, with possibility and fear. Richard glanced at Sarah, who gave a small nod. "Yes," he admitted, voice barely audible. "I am." Jacob processed this, his expression unreadable. "Why weren't you here before?" "I didn't know about you," Richard answered honestly. "If I had, I would have been here. I promise you that." The boy considered this, then looked to his mother. "You didn't tell him about me?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was protecting you. Maybe I was wrong." Jacob set his backpack down with deliberate care. "I need to think," he announced, and walked to his bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. The quiet dignity of his exit left both adults speechless. "He's processing," Sarah said finally. "He does that, takes things in, thinks them through." "Like his father," Richard murmured. The following days brought chaos. Reporters camped outside the diner. Charlotte gave a calculated interview portraying herself as the wronged wife while simultaneously announcing their separation. Winter Solutions stock fluctuated wildly as the board debated Richard's future with the company he had built. But amid the public storm, something quieter and more important was happening. Jacob had questions, thousands of them. He asked them, methodically collecting information about the father he never knew existed. "Do you like science fiction?" "Yes, especially Asimov." "Can you do math in your head?" "Yes, it had always come easily." "Why do you wear suits all the time?" "Habit, not preference." "Did you know your dad?" "Yes, but they were never close." Each answer formed a bridge between them, tentative but growing stronger. Richard found himself looking forward to these interrogation sessions, often conducted over ice cream or while throwing a baseball in the park, away from the media's prying eyes. Sarah watched their growing connection with complicated emotions. Relief that Jacob hadn't been traumatized, fear of what Richard's presence might mean for their future, and something unexpected, a softening toward the man himself, who was proving to be different from the ambitious young executive she had known. 2 weeks after the revelation, Richard arrived at the apartment with papers in hand. "Legal recognition," he explained, spreading documents on the kitchen table after Jacob had gone to bed. "Not custody, just acknowledgement of paternity and reasonable visitation. No courts, no battles, unless you want that." Sarah studied him. "Why the change of heart? Your lawyer was pushing for joint custody last I heard." "Because Jacob deserves stability," Richard admitted. "You've given him that his whole life. I won't disrupt it now. I just want to be part of it, on whatever terms you think best." Sarah ran her fingers over the papers, considering. "And the company? Your wife? Your life?" "Charlotte and I are divorcing. The company will survive with or without me as CEO. As for my life..." Richard looked around the small apartment, which had begun to feel more like home than his penthouse ever had. "I'm re-evaluating what matters." What neither of them knew was that Jacob sat just outside the kitchen, listening to every word, eyes wide with the realization that the grown-ups in his life were as complicated and confused as he sometimes felt. Is it possible to rebuild what was never built in the first place? Can 3 people become a family when the foundation was laid on secrets and separation? The answer lies in what they're willing to risk for each other. Summer arrived in Chicago with a vengeance. Heat shimmered off the pavement as Richard approached the courthouse, photographers tracking his every move. The divorce proceedings had turned ugly, with Charlotte fighting for half of everything, including his shares in Winter Solutions. Inside, his lawyer met him with a grim expression. "She's demanding access to all your personal communications from the past year, trying to prove you had knowledge of Jacob earlier than you claim." Richard loosened his tie, feeling the weight of these past months. "Let her search. The truth is on my side." Across town, Sarah opened the diner for lunch service, trying to ignore the handful of photographers still lingering outside. Business had actually improved since the scandal broke. People came for the gossip, but stayed for her cooking. Still, the constant scrutiny wore on her. Jacob had adjusted better than anyone expected. After the initial shock and some difficult questions, he had settled into a new routine that included Richard, weekend visits, Tuesday dinner, and baseball games whenever the Cubs were in town. The boy seemed to understand, with his unique childlike wisdom, that adults sometimes made mistakes but were trying their best to fix them. As the summer progressed, Richard made a decision. He purchased a brownstone in Jacob's school district, not too close to intrude on Sarah's independence, but near enough to be present in his son's life. The place needed work, and Richard found unexpected satisfaction in renovation tasks he would previously have delegated. One Saturday, Jacob helped him paint the bedroom that would be his when he visited. "Blue," the boy had insisted. "Like the sky, not the ocean." As they worked, Jacob asked casually, "Do you miss being rich?" Richard laughed, surprised. "I'm still wealthy, Jacob. Just reprioritizing. Mom says money doesn't make people happy." Richard dabbed paint on Jacob's nose, earning a giggle. "Your mum is very wise." Later, Sarah arrived to pick Jacob up. She stood in the doorway of the half-painted room, expression softening at the sight of her son and his father covered in matching blue splatters. "Looks like you two have been productive," she remarked. Something in her tone made Richard look up sharply. Sarah had been cordial these past months, cooperative for Jacob's sake, but always with a careful distance. Today, something was different. "Everything okay?" he asked as Jacob raced off to wash his hands. Sarah hesitated. "The diner's in trouble. The novelty of the scandal has worn off, and the summer tourist season is ending. I'm 3 months behind on the commercial lease." Pride had cost her to admit this. Richard knew better than to offer money outright. "I might have an idea," he said carefully. "No strings attached." The idea was simple. Rebranding, not Marie's home cooking, but J&Rs, named for Jacob and his parents. A fresh start, with Richard as a silent partner and Sarah maintaining operational control. A family business for a newly formed family. To Richard's surprise, Sarah agreed. "For Jacob," she said, "and maybe for us too." The renovation began. In September, Richard hired contractors, but worked alongside them, learning what it meant to build something with his hands, rather than just his checkbook. Sarah designed a new menu, blending comfort food with upscale touches that reflected both their worlds. Jacob appointed himself official taste tester, a role he took very seriously. As autumn painted Chicago in gold and crimson, something shifted. Between Richard and Sarah, the careful politeness evolved into genuine warmth, then friendship, then something more. They moved cautiously, aware of the stakes, of the child watching them with hopeful eyes. Their first real date wasn't planned. They had been reviewing tile samples for the diner's new floor when Jacob announced he was sleeping over at his friend Ethan's house. "It's already arranged," he informed them with suspicious casualness. "Ethan's mom is waiting outside." After he left, Richard and Sarah stood in awkward silence. "Did our 7-year-old just orchestrate a date night?" Richard finally asked. Sarah laughed, the sound lighter than he'd heard in months. "I think we've been manipulated by a master." They ended up walking along Lake Michigan, talking for hours about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, the years between their brief connection and their current complicated reality. "I was so angry at you," Sarah admitted, as they sat on a bench watching the moonlight on the water. "Not just for being absent, but for making me face what I'd done in keeping Jacob from you." "We both made mistakes," Richard acknowledged. "But look what came from them." He nodded, toward a family passing by, a father lifting his laughing child onto his shoulders. Sarah's hand found his, tentative but warm. "I'm not saying this will be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is." The grand reopening of J&R's was scheduled for early December. The renovation was nearly complete, transforming the tired diner into a warm, inviting space that honored its history while embracing its future. Jacob had designed the logo himself, a simple drawing of 3 people holding hands. 1 week before opening, Charlotte made her final move. Her lawyers filed a motion, claiming that Richard's investment in the diner was an attempt to hide assets during the divorce proceedings. Suddenly, everything was frozen, the bank accounts, the renovation funds, even Richard's personal accounts. "She can't do this," Sarah fumed as they sat in the half-finished diner. "Opening night is in 7 days." Richard looked around at the space that had come to represent his new beginning. The tables without chairs, the kitchen equipment still in crates, the sign uninstalled. Charlotte had calculated perfectly, striking when it would hurt most. "She can," he said quietly. And she did. For the first time since this journey began, Richard felt defeat washing over him. He had walked away from his company, lost his marriage, been vilified in the press, all for a chance at the family he never knew he wanted. Now it seemed that family's future was in jeopardy too. Can Richard save the diner and their fresh start? Will Charlotte's final act of vengeance destroy what they've worked so hard to build? The family's fate hangs in the balance. The half-finished, a diner seemed to mock them with its potential. Walls freshly painted, but floors unfinished, new appliances still wrapped in plastic. 7 days until the grand opening, and everything had ground to a halt. "We could postpone," Sarah suggested, though her eyes revealed how devastating that would be. They had already advertised, already accepted reservations. Richard paced the unfinished floor, mind racing. His personal assets were frozen, but his network wasn't. He had spent decades building relationships in Chicago's business community. Perhaps it was time to cash in some favors. "Give me 24 hours," he said, determination replacing defeat. "I need to make some calls." The next morning, a truck arrived, then another, and another. By noon, the sidewalk outside J&R's was crowded with contractors, electricians and designers, all volunteering their services. Michael called in some favors, Richard explained to a stunned Sarah as his brother supervised a team installing chairs. "Some of these folks have kids at his school." "And the rest?" she asked, gesturing to a crew unloading kitchen equipment. Richard smiled. "It turns out not everyone at Winter Solutions was loyal to Charlotte. My former COO is handling the financials until the court sorts things out. What happened over the next 6 days could only be described as a miracle of community. Word spread through the neighborhood, and people appeared with offers of help. A retired electrician finished the wiring. A group of culinary students polished glassware. Jacob's entire class made paper decorations for the windows. Sarah moved through it all in a daze of gratitude. "I never expected this," she confessed to Richard as they worked late into the night. "Most of these people are strangers." "Not strangers," Richard corrected. "Neighbors. This is what I was missing all those years in my tower. Connection to something real." The night before the opening, with everything miraculously ready, they celebrated privately, just the three of them. Jacob had insisted on setting the table with the new dishes, carefully arranging each place, setting with meticulous precision. "A toast," Richard proposed, raising his glass of sparkling cider. Jacob had requested they all drink the same thing. "To new beginnings." "To family," Sarah added softly. "To us," Jacob exclaimed, clinking his glass with enthusiasm that nearly spilled his drink. As they ate the meal Sarah had prepared, Richard found himself studying their faces in the warm light, Jacob's animated expressions as he described his role as official greeter for tomorrow's opening, Sarah's gentle smile as she watched their son. This, he realized, was wealth beyond measure. Later, after Jacob had gone to bed, Richard and Sarah stood in the completed diner, taking in the transformation. "We did it," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You did it," Richard corrected. "This was always your dream. I just helped." "Clear a path." Sarah shook her head. "That's not true. This place, it's different now, better. It has pieces of all of us." Their hands found each other in the dim light, fingers intertwining with a familiarity that belied their complicated history. "I want you to know," Richard began, "whatever happens tomorrow with Charlotte, with the courts, I'm not going anywhere. Not ever again." Sarah turned to face him, eyes searching his. "I believe you." Opening day dawned clear and crisp. A line had formed outside J&R's before the doors were even unlocked. Jacob, dressed in a miniature version of Richard's button-down shirt, vibrated with excitement as he prepared to hand out menus. "It's packed," he reported, peering through the window. "I think I see my teacher and Ethan's family." The moment of truth arrived. Sarah unlocked the doors, and warmth flooded in, not just from the December sunshine, but from the community that had rallied around them. Tables filled immediately, the kitchen hummed with activity. Jacob moved between tables, with natural charm introducing himself as the J in J&R's. Richard found himself manning the coffee station, a task he had never imagined enjoying. Yet here he was, chatting with customers, refilling cups, feeling more fulfilled than he had in all his years behind an executive desk. Midway through the morning rush, the door chimed again. Richard looked up to see Charlotte standing in the entrance, elegant as always in a tailored coat. The diner fell silent, conversations suspended in anticipation of confrontation. Richard moved toward her, heart pounding. Charlotte. She surveyed the bustling diner, taking in the families enjoying breakfast, the staff moving efficiently, the atmosphere of genuine warmth. "So this is what you left everything for," she said quietly. "Not everything," Richard corrected, "just the things that didn't matter." Charlotte's gaze found Jacob, who was watching them with undisguised curiosity. Something in her expression shifted. "He has your eyes," she acknowledged. "Charlotte." She raised a hand to stop him. "My lawyers will be contacting yours this afternoon. I'm dropping the injunction on your accounts." Richard stared, disbelieving. "Why?" A hint of her old smile ghosted across her face. "Let's just say I found clarity. Besides, Winter Solutions stock has actually improved since you left. The board named me CEO yesterday." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Richard stunned in her wake. Sarah appeared at his side. "What was that about?" Before he could answer, Jacob bounded up. "Was that your ex-wife? She looks like a movie star." Richard laughed, the tension dissolving. "Yes, she does, and yes, she was." "Is she still mad at us?" Jacob asked, his perception acute as always. Richard considered this, looking at the door, where Charlotte had exited. "No, buddy. I think she just made peace with us, and herself." The day continued in a blur of activity. By closing time, the register was full, the reviews were glowing, and the reservation book for the coming weeks was nearly complete. As Sarah locked the door behind the last customers, exhaustion and elation mingled on her face. "I can't believe we actually pulled this off. Did you doubt we would?" Richard asked, putting an arm around Jacob, who was half asleep against his side. "Honestly, yes," Sarah admitted. "This whole year has felt like some strange dream. Finding you again, watching you with Jacob, building this place together. I kept waiting for it to fall apart." Richard stepped closer, drawing both her and Jacob into an embrace. "Some things are built to last." Spring arrived in Chicago, melting away the last traces of a harsh winter. J&R's had become a neighborhood fixture, with lines on weekends and a loyal weekday crowd. Richard had found his place there, not just as an investor, but as a presence, learning the business from the ground up alongside Sarah. The brownstone was finished now, warm and inviting. Jacob split his time between there and the apartment above the diner. His two worlds merged into one cohesive life. His school friends no longer whispered about the newspaper stories. The scandal had faded, replaced by the simple fact of a boy who had found his father. On a particularly beautiful Saturday, Richard suggested a picnic in Millennium Park. They spread a blanket near the Cloud Gate sculpture, Jacob racing around its reflective surface, while Sarah unpacked the basket. "He never stops moving," Richard observed fondly. "Neither did you once upon a time," Sarah replied, "always running toward the next achievement." Richard watched his son, seeing himself in the boy's determination and energy, but also seeing something better. A child surrounded by love, secure in his place in the world. "I was running in the wrong direction," he admitted. "It just took me a while to realize it." Sarah leaned against his shoulder, a gesture that had become natural between them. Better late than never. Later, as Jacob tired himself out and sprawled across the blanket with a book, Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I've been carrying this around for weeks," he confessed, opening it to reveal a simple but elegant ring. "Waiting for the perfect moment." Sarah's eyes widened. "Richard, I'm not asking for an answer today," he said quickly. "I know we're still finding our way, but I want you to know that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, this is waiting. I've never been more certain of anything." Sarah took the box, studying the ring inside. "You know, for someone who used to plan hostile takeovers for a living, you're surprisingly patient now." Richard laughed. "I've learned that the best things can't be rushed or forced. They have to grow naturally." Jacob looked up from his book, noticing the moment unfolding between them. "Is that a ring? Are you guys getting married?" Sarah tucked the box away with a smile. "Someday, maybe, when the time is right." "Cool," Jacob replied with the easy acceptance of childhood. Can we get ice cream now? As they walked through the park, Jacob between them holding both their hands, Richard felt a completeness he had never known possible. His life had been derailed, his carefully constructed plans scattered to the wind, and yet here he was, happier than he had ever imagined. That evening, as Jacob slept and Sarah worked on the next week's menu, Richard received an email from his former assistant at Winter Solutions. The company was thriving under Charlotte's leadership, taking new directions that suited her vision, better than his had. She had found her purpose, just as he had found his. Richard closed his laptop and joined Sarah at the kitchen table, sliding into the seat across from her. "Need help?" She glanced up with a smile. "Always." As they worked side by side, Richard reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. From the heights of corporate power to this modest kitchen, from a marriage of convenience to a relationship built on genuine connection, from a man who had everything except what mattered to one who had found true wealth in the eyes of his son and the heart of the woman beside him. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Richard reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "That sometimes the most important things in life find us when we're not looking for them." Sarah's fingers tightened around his. "And sometimes what we need has been there all along, just waiting to be discovered." Outside, Chicago continued. Its endless rhythm, lights twinkling in skyscrapers, cars flowing along Lakeshore Drive, lives intersecting in countless ways. But here, in this moment, in this kitchen, Richard Winters had found his home. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments. So that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.